On February 25, 1863, the United States Senate passed a bill by 2 votes, 3 to 21, 3, if one senator had stayed home that morning, if one had changed his mind between breakfast and the chamber floor, if one letter from home had arrived a day earlier and kept him off the train to Washington, the entire architecture of modern American finance would not exist. Won't he tell you what that vote replaced? Not what it created. That story gets told. What it replaced, the system that had been running for 150 years before that morning, the one that built Independence Hall, the one that produced furniture so well made it is still holding weight 2 centuries later, the one that a community of Americans had to petition Congress for special legal permission to keep using in 1965, 100 years after it was destroyed, because that is how complete the replacement was. Won't he? You needed an act of Congress just to be allowed to continue doing what your great-great-grandparents had done without asking anyone's permission. The Carpenters Company of Philadelphia was founded in 1724. It is the oldest craft guild in North America still operating today. 300 years. Their members were not carpenters in the way we use that word now. They were master builders, a single role that combined everything we now split between architects, engineers, contractors, and project managers. When Philadelphia needed Independence Hall, they built it. When the colonies needed a location for the first Continental Congress, the Carpenters Company offered their own hall, which they had constructed themselves beginning in 1770. Those buildings are still standing, not maintained by expensive restoration teams holding them together. Standing, their bones intact, their proportions sound, their materials lasting longer than most modern construction will ever last. The Carpenters Company kept a rule book, a pricing guide with formulas for calculating the cost of every stage of construction, every joint, every beam, every finish, and the system used officials called measurers who always worked in pairs, specifically so no single person could inflate a price for personal gain. The entire architecture was designed around one assumption, that fairness was achievable, that it could be written down and enforced by the community itself, without any external institution in the middle. Won't he? In 1817, Thomas Jefferson requested a copy of this rule book. He was refused. The former president of the United States was told the book was for members only. Won't he? 3. I spent a long time thinking about why, and what I found was not about carpentry at all. It was about what the rule book actually contained, not trade secrets in the commercial sense, something far more threatening, proof that pricing could be made fair, that a community of skilled people could decide what things should cost, not what the market would bear, not what a desperate client could be talked into paying, but what was actually fair. Jefferson couldn't have that book because the people who held it understood exactly what it represented. Won't he? 3. I want to show you 3 dates. Hold them together, because separately they look like coincidence. Won't he? 3. Together they look like something else. May 20th, 1862. Lincoln signs the Homestead Act. Any adult citizen can claim 160 acres of public land for $18. Free land. The most extraordinary democratic gesture a nation had ever made, distributing itself to its own people. Here is what the National Archives states plainly about what followed. Comparatively few laborers and farmers could actually afford to build a farm. Developing a homestead cost between $1,000 and $2,500, tools, seed, livestock, building materials. Only 40% of homestead claims were ever successfully completed. Most of the land ended up with speculators, cattlemen, mining operations, and railroads. The Homestead Act gave Americans free land they could not afford to use. February 25, 1863. 9 months later, Lincoln signs the National Currency Act. The Federal Reserve's own historical archives confirm the primary purpose to create institutional demand for federal government debt. National banks were required to purchase treasury bonds. In exchange, they received bank notes to issue more money They had to buy more bonds. The system was designed from its foundation to create buyers for federal debt, not to serve the population, to serve the government's need to borrow. Then in 1864, a 2% tax was applied to state bank notes. By 1865, that tax had risen to 10%. It effectively destroyed state currencies and the local exchange systems built around them. 3. In the space of 2 years, an entire ecosystem of local economy, the one that had produced Independence Hall, the one that had functioned without institutional intermediaries for a century and a half, was made economically non-viable. Not because it failed, not because communities rejected it, because a federal tax made it impossible to sustain. By the 1880s, approximately 2,000 company towns existed across the United States. Workers were paid not in currency but in scrip, a substitute that could only be spent at company stores. The Social Welfare History Project documents what followed. Housing costs and groceries in company towns became exorbitant. Workers built up debts they were required to pay off before leaving. 75% of all scrip issued in America came from coal companies in Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia. Workers could not leave because they owed more than they earned. The Homestead Act gave Americans free land they couldn't develop. The National Banking Act created the lenders. The company towns created the borrowers who could never escape. The sequence is not random, it is a system. And the one community that tried to maintain the old way, that refused the replacement and kept operating on the basis of mutual obligation instead of institutional debt, had to fight the federal government for the right to do it. The Amish, 150 years of contribution-based economy. When a member of the community faces a medical bill they cannot cover, they stand up in their weekly gathering and explain their situation. No one leaves until enough has been contributed to cover the expense. No corporation extracting 30%. No bank charging interest. The way the old system worked, the federal government attempted to require their participation in Social Security. The Amish understood it not as a tax but as commercial insurance, something their faith prohibits. The battle went on for years. It required an act of Congress to resolve. 3. In 1965, Congress granted them an exemption. They still file IRS Form 4729. They still pay every other tax. They simply have legal permission to continue operating an economic system that had functioned without incident for a century and a half. 3. Think about what that means. A community had to petition the United States Congress for special legal permission to keep doing what their great-grandparents had done, without asking anyone. There is one more detail, the one I keep coming back to. Genealogists have a name for something they encounter constantly in American family research. They call it the 1870 brick wall. Before that year, tracing most American family lines becomes exponentially harder. Records are sparse, fragmented, inconsistent. The 1890 census would have filled in enormous gaps. It would have connected millions of American families to the years before the banking consolidation, before the company towns, before the systematic replacement of local economies with national institutions. In 1896, a fire at the Commerce Department damaged portions of the 1890 census. The damaged materials sat in storage for 12 years, untouched. Then, in 1933, Congress authorized their destruction. The authorization was passed and acted upon. The records were gone. One day before that authorization was finalized, President Hoover laid the cornerstone for a new building, specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of loss: the National Archives. A fireproof repository built to ensure American records would never be destroyed by accident. The records were destroyed the day before the fireproof building was officially sanctioned. 3. I am not telling you what to conclude. I am showing you the sequence. The buildings the Carpenters Company built are still standing. The Amish are still covering each other's medical bills without a corporate intermediary, still building structures that will last. still operating a system that a congressional act had to specifically exempt them from being forced to abandon, and the records that would have connected modern Americans to the people who lived before the transition, who built furniture that is still holding weight 2 centuries later, who exchanged labor without signing loan agreements, who developed fair pricing without an institution in the middle, were authorized for destruction in 1933, one day before the cornerstone of a fireproof archive was laid, Won't-he 3 to 21, in a Senate chamber. In February of 1863, the world your great-great-grandparents had known and built and maintained and trusted was replaced with the one we inherited, Won't-he 3, the one where furniture is designed to last 5 years, the one where workers owe more than they earn, Won't-he 3, the community that simply wants to take care of its own members has to file federal paperwork to do it. I do not know if the sequence was planned. I know that the sequence happened. I know that what it produced was total. And I know that the records that might have told us what was lost were gone by the next morning. That is what 2 votes looks like, 160 years later.